Family is rarely a safe haven. Sometimes, it is a ruthless contract where your value depends purely on obedience. 8 years ago, my father threw me into a -20-degree Chicago blizzard for refusing to be his corporate puppet. He called me a cheap disgrace, never suspecting that the daughter he left to freeze is now the hidden billionaire holding the death warrant for his entire empire. The scapegoat is about to become the executioner. Hello to our wonderful audience at Maya Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you for taking the time to be here with us today. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the necessary budget to keep operating normally. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel, where you can listen to even better, longer, and more detailed exclusive true stories with multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can easily join by scanning the QR code on your screen right now, or by clicking the Patreon link in the description or the pinned comment of this video. Now, let us begin today's story. My name is Scarlett Robinson, and this is how I destroyed the empire that threw me away. I am 32 years old, standing in the center of the grand foyer of a $50 million classic mansion, entirely mine. Situated in the hyper-exclusive Gold Coast neighborhood of Chicago, I bought this estate just last week. I paid for it in full, using cold hard cash, with absolutely no mortgage and no strings attached. Right now, I am holding a heavy crystal glass of aged bourbon, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the ferocious winter winds whipping across Lake Michigan. The water itself looks like fractured glass, entirely frozen and unyielding. The cold outside is absolute and unforgiving, but inside, surrounded by imported Italian marble, century-old mahogany panels, and roaring fireplaces, the air is perfectly climate-controlled. Yet, no matter how warm this luxurious sanctuary gets, watching the ice outside always pulls my mind back to the night my bloodline completely froze over. 8 years ago, the temperature in Chicago dropped to a brutal -20 degrees. That was the night my father, Arthur Robinson, a ruthless commercial real estate tycoon who ruled his corporate empire like a tyrannical medieval king, threw me out of his house. I can still distinctly feel the biting, razor-sharp wind slicing through my thin wool coat as I stood on the porch. My unforgivable crime. I flatly refused to be a mindless corporate puppet in his bloated, environmentally destructive real estate firm. I wanted to pursue a degree in clean energy engineering. I wanted to build the future of sustainable architecture, not maintain his decaying monuments of the past. "You are throwing away a flawless legacy for absolute garbage," he screamed that night, his face purple with blinding rage, as the heavy oak doors of our family estate stood wide open to the howling blizzard. "Clean energy is a pathetic myth for weak-minded fools. If you walk out that door to chase this delusional fantasy, you are no daughter of mine. Get out and stay out." He did not just kick me out into the snow. He meticulously orchestrated my total ruin. By 8 o'clock the very next morning, every single one of my bank accounts was permanently frozen. The trust fund I had relied on for tuition was completely dissolved. Every influential contact in the industry received a phone call warning them never to hire me. He left me to rot in a leaky, drafty attic in a forgotten, run-down suburb, shivering violently under a thin, cheap blanket, eating instant noodles while desperately trying to finish my final thesis. My mother and my older sister laughed at my misery from afar. They ruthlessly mocked my eco-friendly building materials project, writing it off as the tragic, embarrassing rebellion of a spoiled child who would soon come crawling back on her knees, begging for their financial scraps. Well, they waited for a surrender that never, ever came. I did not crawl back. Instead, I built an empire that makes Arthur Robinson and his entire real estate firm look like a trivial children's lemonade stand. I am the founder and the chief executive officer of Aegis Terra Innovations. We manufacture the exact sustainable, cutting-edge building materials my father confidently called garbage. Just last month, our company went public with a massive initial public offering. That single, monumental move pushed my personal net worth well past the $1 billion mark, but my family knows absolutely nothing about this incredible shift in power. They are so blindingly arrogant, so deeply entrenched in their suffocating, closed-off high society circles and the shallow vanity of their crumbling concrete skyscrapers, that they never bother to look at the new world rising around them. They do not know what Aegis Terra Innovations is. And they certainly do not have the faintest clue that the anonymous chief executive officer making front-page headlines in the global financial papers is the very same daughter they discarded in the snow 8 years ago. To be completely honest, a small, foolish part of me bought this $50 million mansion hoping for some twisted form of validation. I entertained the naive idea of inviting them here, showing them the grand halls, the sprawling gardens, and the priceless art collection, just to prove that I had not only survived but spectacularly thrived. I thought maybe, just maybe, seeing this undeniable, physical proof of my immense success would force my father to finally look at me with an ounce of genuine respect. But that pathetic, lingering softness died permanently exactly 1 month ago. I bumped into them by pure chance at a wildly expensive, exclusive restaurant downtown. I was dressed simply in a plain sweater and jeans, waiting quietly for a business associate at the bar. When my sister, Victoria, spotted me, she looked me up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust, leaning into my mother to loudly whisper about how incredibly tragic it was that I was clearly struggling to even afford a glass of tap water in such a high-end establishment. Arthur did not even bother to look at me. He looked right through me, treating me like an invisible, offensive stain on the expensive carpet before turning his back completely. That was the exact moment the absolute last drop of family loyalty evaporated from my veins. They did not just want me to fail. They actively needed me to fail so they could continue to feel superior. I realized right then and there that trying to prove myself to them was a complete waste of time. I no longer needed their respect. I needed their absolute, total destruction. And thanks to their own staggering, arrogant ignorance, I am now the one holding the heavy iron hammer, completely ready to shatter their pathetic little world into dust. While I was busy building an empire from the ground up, the glorious, impenetrable fortress of the Robinson family was rapidly rotting from the inside out. My father always believed that concrete and steel were the only true measures of power. However, he completely failed to account for the shifting tides of the modern world. His colossal real estate empire, Pinnacle Skyline Corporation, was bleeding cash at an unprecedented, catastrophic rate. The very buildings he used to proudly mock my clean energy ambitions with had become his absolute undoing. A series of strict new federal emissions laws had recently passed, and his portfolio of ancient, energy-guzzling commercial skyscrapers failed every single environmental compliance test. The fines were astronomical, compounding daily and draining millions of dollars from his accounts every single month. Upgrading those archaic monstrosities to meet the new legal green standards would cost hundreds of millions of dollars, a sum of money that Pinnacle Skyline Corporation simply did not have. Instead of adapting to the changing times, Arthur had taken out massive, high-interest loans to keep the lights on, stubbornly refusing to modernize his operations. Now, the banks were circling his bleeding company like starved vultures, preparing to force him into a brutal Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Yet, if you looked at my mother, Eleanor, you would assume the Robinsons were still swimming in endless oceans of generational wealth. She was a woman entirely constructed from social expectations, expensive silk, and toxic pride. She absolutely refused to let the reality of their impending destitution ruin her flawless image. She was frantically maxing out high-tier credit cards with interest rates nearing 30% just to maintain the hollow illusion of high society dominance. Every single Tuesday afternoon, she hosted lavish, obscenely expensive tea parties at the local country club, pouring vintage champagne and forcing radiant smiles while gossiping with other wealthy socialites. She was swiping plastic she could never possibly pay off just to hide the humiliating truth that the bank was quietly preparing foreclosure documents for their sprawling suburban family estate. She strongly preferred to drown in unrecoverable debt rather than admit defeat to the shallow women she had spent decades looking down upon. Then there was my perfect older sister, Victoria, the undisputed golden child who could do absolutely no wrong in the eyes of my parents. Victoria proudly ran a luxury interior design firm that catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy elite of Chicago. In reality, her business was a spectacular, glorious failure. It was a pathetic vanity project completely incapable of generating actual profit. For 6 straight years, her firm had operated at a massive financial loss, kept alive entirely by Arthur silently pumping hundreds of thousands of dollars of corporate funds into her accounts every single quarter. She bought imported Italian leather furniture for her lavish office and flew first class to Paris for design inspiration, all on our father's dime. But when Pinnacle Skyline Corporation began suffocating under federal fines, Arthur abruptly severed her financial lifeline. Without our father's limitless bankroll to cover her stunningly incompetent management, Victoria was suddenly facing immediate asset seizure. Creditors were aggressively threatening to repossess her luxury vehicles and auction off her entire warehouse of inventory. The golden child was panicking, her manicured nails frantically scratching at the bottom of an entirely empty barrel. Adding volatile fuel to this glorious dumpster fire was my brother-in-law, Marcus. Marcus was a shameless, aggressively arrogant investment banker who treated everyone around him like dirt beneath his custom-made shoes. He had married Victoria purely for the prestigious Robinson name and the unbreakable financial safety net it supposedly provided. Now that the net was rapidly disintegrating, his entire life was spiraling completely out of control. Marcus was drowning in his own secret mountain of private gambling debts and terrible stock market wagers. His marriage to Victoria was hanging by a singular, frayed thread, held together only by their mutual terror of becoming poor. His absolute last desperate hope was to secure a massive promotion to senior partner at his elite investment bank. That promotion came with a multi-million-dollar cash bonus. Enough money to temporarily plug the gaping holes in his sinking ship and keep Victoria permanently wrapped in the expensive designer labels she constantly demanded. In a desperate, pathetic attempt to save his legacy from total annihilation, my father started begging the industry for a corporate buyout. He was shopping Pinnacle Skyline Corporation around the market, actively searching for a massive conglomerate willing to absorb his crippling debt and take over his failing properties. Ironically, the only entities capable of overhauling his toxic buildings were the massive green technology corporations he had spent his entire life loudly and publicly despising. Eventually, a highly secretive, aggressively expanding green tech giant expressed strong interest in a complete acquisition. Arthur, utterly blinded by his own towering ego, convinced himself that this anonymous buyer recognized the sheer historical brilliance of the Robinson name. "They need my expertise to navigate the city," he confidently boasted to his country club buddies. He genuinely believed that the new owners would undoubtedly keep him on the board of directors as honorary chairman, allowing him to maintain his lavish salary and his untouchable status in the corporate world. He truly believed he was negotiating a brilliant victory, completely oblivious to the fact that he was eagerly walking toward his own execution. The absolute most beautiful piece of this impending disaster, however, was the broker. The investment bank handling the acquisition for the anonymous green tech giant had assigned a specific representative to close the massive deal. That representative was none other than Marcus. When Marcus was handed the confidential portfolio, he genuinely believed the universe was handing him a winning lottery ticket. By brokering the sale of his father-in-law's crumbling empire to this mysterious billionaire buyer, Marcus was absolutely certain he would earn the massive commission required to finally secure his senior partner promotion. He strutted around his office, loudly bragging to his colleagues that he was the ultimate savior of the Robinson family legacy. Neither Arthur, nor Victoria, nor Marcus had the slightest, microscopic inkling that the anonymous, ruthless buyer looking to swallow their entire existence whole was me. Desperation breeds a very specific, highly dangerous brand of stupidity. As the rumors of my father's imminent financial collapse began leaking through the tightly sealed cracks of Chicago's elite circles, Victoria and Marcus decided that the only logical way to silence the gossip was to double down on the illusion. They concocted a wildly reckless plan to host the most extravagant, visually blinding charity gala of the entire decade. It was a classic, transparent smokescreen. In their panicked minds, if they could just herd the wealthiest, most influential figures in the city into one room and drown them in top-tier luxury, the whispers of their impending bankruptcy would magically evaporate. They needed to project an image of untouchable supremacy, even if it meant risking the absolute final scraps of their rapidly decaying wealth. However, they quickly slammed into a massive, humiliating brick wall. High society operates entirely on whispers, and the whispers surrounding the Robinson family name had turned highly toxic. When Victoria attempted to book the grand ballrooms at the most prestigious hotels and elite country clubs, she was met with politely slammed doors. Venue managers, fully aware of the unpaid bills piling up at Pinnacle Skyline Corporation, suddenly claimed their calendars were completely full for the next 2 years. No respectable establishment wanted to risk hosting a lavish party for a family that might not be able to clear the final invoice. The golden child was spiraling into a total panic, screaming at event planners over the phone as her grand vision of social salvation rapidly collapsed. Just as they were about to abandon the entire pathetic scheme, Marcus's deeply overworked assistant stumbled upon a highly confidential, unlisted private rental opportunity. It was a temporary, highly exclusive offering circulating only in the deepest underground channels of luxury real estate brokers. The sprawling ground floor of a $50 million mansion located directly in the heart of the Gold Coast. The listing explicitly stated that the property belonged to a highly secretive, anonymous foreign billionaire who was temporarily out of the country and willing to lease the grand entertainment spaces for a single, unprecedented evening. Marcus practically salivated at the prospect. Hosting their gala in a $50 million private mega mansion was infinitely more prestigious than renting a public hotel ballroom. It was the ultimate power move, but the rental fee for a single night was absolutely staggering. It was an astronomical figure that would instantly vaporize whatever tiny fraction of liquid cash Marcus still possessed. Completely blinded by his obsessive need to secure his senior partner promotion and silence his wife's endless complaints, Marcus made a fatal, irreversible gamble. He drained every single dollar from their joint savings accounts. When that was not nearly enough, he secretly reached out to shady, high-interest private lenders, taking out predatory loans against the remaining equity of his own luxury vehicles just to scrape together the necessary funds. He then bombarded the brokerage firm with a series of frantic, utterly pathetic emails, in one breath. He arrogantly boasted about the legendary, untouchable status of the Robinson family, and in the next, he practically begged the property managers to grant them the honor of using the space, promising that their gala would bring unprecedented prestige to the home. Miles away, sitting in the sleek, minimalist penthouse office of Aegis Terra Innovations, I watched an encrypted email notification pop up on my private monitor. My lead property manager had forwarded me a highly urgent rental request for my newly purchased Gold Coast estate. As I read the names on the application, Marcus and Victoria, a slow, freezing smile spread across my face. They were actually trying to rent my house. The sheer, magnificent irony of the situation felt like a beautifully orchestrated symphony. They were desperately clawing at the gates of a sanctuary owned by the very same woman they had gleefully discarded like trash. My initial instinct was to immediately reject the application and let them continue to drown in their own public humiliation. But true revenge is never about simply denying your enemies a temporary lifeline. It is about handing them the exact rope they need to hang themselves. I leaned back in my leather chair and hit reply. Operating firmly behind the impenetrable legal shield of my shell company, Emerald Zenith Holdings, I officially approved their frantic request. But I was not about to make it standard procedure. I instructed my legal team to draft a very specific, highly customized rental contract just for my beloved brother-in-law, to completely hook Marcus and ensure he could not possibly resist the bait. I inserted a brilliantly deceptive clause. I officially waived the mandatory massive security deposit, framing it as a gesture of immense professional respect. In the official correspondence, my broker shamelessly flattered Marcus, stating that the mysterious billionaire owner was highly impressed by the unparalleled, stellar reputation of the Robinson family name and considered them the absolute perfect, most trustworthy guests. However, this complimentary waiver came with one non-negotiable, lethal condition. To bypass the security deposit, the contract demanded that 100% of the astronomical rental fee must be paid entirely in cash, transferred up front, and finalized a full 48 hours before the event doors opened. It was a no-refund, ironclad agreement. When the approved contract landed in his inbox, Marcus did not even bother to read the finer details. His massive, fragile ego had been stroked so perfectly that he completely bypassed all standard legal precautions. Within hours, he had aggressively wired the entire massive sum of borrowed, desperate cash directly into the accounts of Emerald Zenith Holdings. Back at my parents' crumbling suburban estate, I heard through my lingering industry contacts that the Robinson family threw a wild champagne-fueled celebration that evening. They proudly toasted to their own brilliant cunning, loudly congratulating Marcus for securing the ultimate venue that would undoubtedly save their social standing and cement his promotion. They clinked their crystal glasses, laughing with arrogant relief, completely and entirely unaware that they had just enthusiastically dumped their absolute final pennies to purchase front-row tickets to their own personal guillotine. Friday morning arrived with a brutal, freezing gray sky that perfectly matched the atmosphere inside my corporate headquarters. The day of the grand charity gala had finally come. At exactly 9 o'clock in the morning, I sat perfectly still at the head of the massive frost glass conference table in the penthouse boardroom of Aegis Terra Innovations. The room was silent, completely insulated from the chaotic city noise below. Spread out across the polished surface in front of me were the highly confidential, internal financial audits of Pinnacle Skyline Corporation. Reading through my father's private ledgers was like performing a forensic autopsy on a bleeding corporate corpse. It was so much worse than the public markets even suspected. My chief financial officer walked into the boardroom, carrying a sleek leather folder. He did not smile. This was a strictly professional execution. He placed the heavy folder directly in front of me and delivered the final verdict. "They have completely surrendered, Madam CEO," he stated, his voice echoing sharply off the glass walls. The board of directors at Pinnacle Skyline Corporation held an emergency vote at dawn. They are absolutely terrified of the impending federal indictments regarding their falsified environmental compliance certificates. To avoid federal prison and immediate asset liquidation, they have officially agreed to sell the entire corporation to us for pennies on the dollar. They are desperate for our capital to pay off the environmental fines. I slowly opened the heavy leather folder. There it was, the absolute surrender of Arthur Robinson. My father, the untouchable titan of Chicago real estate, had authorized the complete transfer of his beloved empire, blindly assuming that this massive anonymous conglomerate would retain him as an honorary chairman to preserve the company's historical legacy. He actually believed he was securing a comfortable, multi-million-dollar golden parachute. I picked up my heavy platinum fountain pen. I did not hesitate for a single fraction of a second. I coldly signed my signature across the final acquisition documents, legally absorbing his entire life's work into my own portfolio. But I was not just buying a company. I was setting a lethal corporate trap. By executing this specific contract, I officially activated a deeply buried, highly complex legal provision. The parent company retained the absolute right to immediately terminate the entire executive board, completely devoid of any severance packages, stock options, or retirement benefits. If any historical financial misconduct was discovered, my father thought his secrets were safe. He had absolutely no idea that I already held thousands of pages of encrypted digital evidence proving his gross negligence and federal fraud. The axe was already swinging. He just could not see the blade yet. While I was silently signing my father's professional death warrant, a completely different kind of chaos was unfolding downtown. At the towering glass skyscraper of the city's most elite investment bank, Marcus was abruptly pulled away from his trading desk. His managing director, a notoriously ruthless man who held the absolute keys to the senior partner promotion, summoned Marcus into his corner office and locked the heavy wooden door. "I just received a highly classified, encrypted communication from the legal counsel representing our anonymous green tech buyer," the managing director said, staring sharply at Marcus. "We have a massive development. The chief executive officer of Aegis Terra Innovations is stepping out of the shadows. They have officially informed us that they will be making a surprise, in-person appearance tonight, and they are coming directly to your Gold Coast Charity Gala to finalize the brokerage paperwork." Marcus practically stopped breathing. The blood rushed violently to his head, his heart hammering against his ribs like a frantic animal. This was the ultimate validation of his reckless gamble. The mysterious billionaire savior was actually coming to his event. The second Marcus left the corner office, he sprinted into a vacant glass stairwell and frantically dialed Victoria's number. "Victoria, listen to me very carefully," Marcus hissed into the phone, his voice shaking with sheer, intoxicating adrenaline. "We are about to become completely untouchable. The buyer is coming to the gala tonight. Do you understand what this means? I am going to personally meet the chief executive officer of the most powerful green technology firm in the country. I am going to shake their hand, charm them, lock them in a private room, and close this massive broker deal directly on our own territory. This is going to save your father's company, and it is going to guarantee my promotion to senior partner. We have officially won." Blinded by his own staggering arrogance and the intoxicating smell of impending victory, Marcus rushed back to his desk to finalize the preliminary paperwork. Aegis Terra Innovations had sent over the final broker commitment agreement, a mandatory digital document required to secure his multi-million-dollar commission. Marcus was so incredibly hyped, so frantically desperate to lock in his winnings before the evening began, that he merely glanced at the final page and aggressively clicked the electronic signature box. He completely bypassed the fine print. He ignored the dense, highly specific legal jargon buried at the very bottom of the agreement. If he had just taken 5 minutes to read what he was signing, he would have discovered a highly unusual, incredibly dangerous morality and ethical conduct clause. The clause explicitly stated that the purchasing chief executive officer held the unilateral, unquestionable authority to instantly void the entire commission, report the broker to the Federal Financial Regulatory Authority, and legally strip away all professional trading licenses if the broker displayed any behavior deemed hostile, discriminatory, insulting, or unethical toward the buyer or their associates. Marcus enthusiastically signed his name, completely unaware that he had just handed me a loaded gun, pointed directly at his own forehead, with my finger resting patiently on the trigger. The evening descended upon the Gold Coast like a heavy, suffocating velvet curtain. Inside my grand foyer, the atmosphere was incredibly thick, almost hard to breathe, dripping with the overwhelming scent of imported white orchids, rich mahogany, and violently expensive vintage champagne. Hundreds of Chicago's most powerful, elite figures packed the main halls, their jewelry flashing brilliantly under the towering, antique crystal chandeliers. A live string quartet played flawlessly in the corner, their delicate notes attempting to mask the predatory nature of the room. Amidst this dazzling display of sheer opulence, the Robinson family strutted through the crowd like absolute monarchs returning to a conquered kingdom. They walked with their chests puffed out, clutching delicate flutes of incredibly expensive champagne, desperately projecting an aura of flawless invincibility. Watching them through the high-definition security monitors in my private penthouse, I could clearly see the frantic, hollow desperation hiding right beneath their polished, practiced smiles. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. They acted as if they personally owned the very marble floor beneath their expensive shoes, completely oblivious to the steel trap clamping firmly shut around their ankles. Down in the main ballroom, Arthur was an absolute, pathetic, nervous wreck. Despite wearing a perfectly tailored midnight blue tuxedo, sweat beaded heavily on his forehead, catching the light in a rather disgusting manner. His eyes darted wildly around the massive room, scrutinizing every unfamiliar face, frantically hunting for the anonymous green technology chief executive officer he so desperately believed was coming to save his drowning empire. He aggressively shoved his way through tight clusters of wealthy guests, rehearsing his pathetic, flattering speeches under his breath, ready to drop to his knees the second the buyer revealed themselves. Meanwhile, my mother and my sister were holding court near the roaring grand fireplace, spinning a spectacular, nauseating web of lies. Eleanor laughed loudly, a shrill, grating sound that cut through the music, as she confidently told a group of influential socialite wives that she was actually incredibly close personal friends with the mysterious foreign billionaire who owned the estate. Victoria chimed in smoothly, swirling her drink and claiming she had personally advised the billionaire owner on the intricate interior design choices for the eastern wing of the mansion. It was absolutely revolting to watch. They were desperately wrapping themselves in the illusion of my wealth to hide their own rapidly approaching undeniable poverty. The tension in the air grew remarkably heavy as the evening dragged on. The anticipation for the mystery buyer was practically vibrating through the floorboards. Then, the massive grandfather clock in the main hall began to chime loudly. It was exactly 8 o'clock in the evening. At that precise, undeniable moment, a soft, crystalline chime echoed through the grand foyer, cutting cleanly through the low, buzzing murmur of the wealthy crowd. Every single eye in the massive room snapped toward the sweeping grand staircase. Located right at the central landing was a magnificent, heavy bronze private elevator. It was a restricted area that had been strictly cordoned off by thick crimson velvet ropes and guarded by massive security personnel all night long. The heavy bronze doors slowly slid open. The string quartet abruptly stopped playing, the cellist dragging his bow across the strings in a harsh, accidental screech. Complete, stunned silence fell over the massive room. I stepped out of the elevator. I was not wearing the cheap, oversized, threadbare sweaters or the worn-out jeans they remembered from the freezing blizzard 8 years ago. I was draped in a breathtaking, custom-tailored dark emerald, haute couture evening gown that caught the chandelier light like shards of cut glass. Heavy, flawless diamonds rested coldly against my collarbone. I stood perfectly still at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the sea of powerful guests, radiating an aura of absolute, untouchable authority. For a few agonizingly long seconds, the entire crowd was entirely paralyzed. Down in the center of the room, the Robinson family stared up at me, their faces completely drained of all color, resembling pale, terrified ghosts. The deeply ingrained image of the pathetic, impoverished daughter they had gleefully discarded was brutally shattered into a million irreversible pieces. But toxic arrogance is a very difficult, stubborn disease to cure. The shock only lasted a brief moment before my father's deeply ingrained, blistering superiority complex violently took over. Arthur's face turned a dangerous, blotchy shade of purple. He pushed violently through the silent crowd, nearly knocking over a waiter, and stormed right to the bottom of the staircase. "What in the absolute hell are you doing here?" Arthur roared, his voice echoing harshly off the vaulted ceilings, completely destroying the elegant atmosphere. "How dare you break into my private charity event? Are you completely insane? Did you actually sneak in through the service entrance to beg for money?" Before I could even open my mouth to respond, Marcus aggressively pushed his way to the front. Marcus had spotted his managing director standing near the front of the bewildered crowd, and his twisted mind decided this was his ultimate golden opportunity to play the ruthless, commanding alpha male for his boss. He pointed a shaking, aggressive finger right at my face. "You pathetic, worthless trash," Marcus spat loudly, his voice echoing across the silent room. making absolutely sure his boss could hear every single venomous word. "Security, get in here right now. I want this deranged woman violently thrown out onto the street immediately. I am going to have you personally arrested and sued for criminal trespassing. You do not belong here, and you will never belong here. We threw you into the gutter 8 years ago, and I will gladly throw you right back out into the freezing cold myself." He was screaming, wildly waving his arms, desperately trying to recreate the exact power dynamic of that freezing winter night. He signaled frantically for the estate guards to grab me, but the massive men in black suits standing rigidly near the walls did not move a single muscle. They remained perfectly still, their hands clasped behind their backs, their eyes fixed straight ahead. The silence in the room became incredibly heavy, thick, and suffocating. Suddenly, Marcus's massive boss, the managing director of the elite investment bank, the very man holding the absolute power over Marcus's desperately needed promotion, stepped slowly and deliberately through the parted crowd. Marcus turned to him with a smug, victorious grin, fully expecting his boss to aggressively applaud his ruthless handling of the situation. "Do not worry, sir," Marcus practically groveled, his voice dripping with desperation. "We are handling this deranged trespasser right now. The billionaire buyer will arrive soon, and the space will be completely cleared of this absolute filth." But the managing director did not even look at Marcus. He did not acknowledge the groveling broker beside him. The older, powerful man was staring directly up the grand staircase at me. The color was rapidly draining from his weathered face, replaced by a look of sheer, absolute, paralyzing terror. The paralyzing silence hanging over the grand ballroom was finally broken by the crisp, authoritative sound of heavy leather shoes echoing against the imported Italian marble. The chief estate manager, a towering man with an impeccably pressed dark suit and a silver security earpiece, stepped forward from the shadows. Marcus puffed out his chest, pointing a trembling, aggressive finger at me once again. "Did you not hear me?" Marcus screamed at the manager, his voice cracking with panicked desperation. "Grab this deranged woman and throw her out onto the street immediately. I paid for this venue. I demand you remove her." The manager did not even look at Marcus. He smoothly bypassed my brother-in-law, marched directly to the bottom of the grand staircase, and stopped right in front of me. Slowly, deliberately, in front of hundreds of Chicago's most influential elites, the imposing manager bowed a full 90 degrees. "Good evening, madam," the manager said, his deep voice carrying clearly across the breathless room. "The security perimeter is fully secured, exactly as you requested. We are awaiting your further instructions." A collective, physical shockwave ripped through the massive crowd. The wealthy socialites and powerful executives gasped loudly, whispering frantically to one another. The color rapidly drained from Marcus's face, leaving him looking like a sick, hollowed-out corpse. Victoria stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth, nearly dropping her crystal champagne flute as her eyes widened in sheer disbelief. I slowly descended the final few steps, my emerald gown sweeping gracefully against the polished marble. I reached into the sleek silk clutch resting in my hand and pulled out a neatly folded, heavy parchment document. "You did not pay for this venue, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly calm, cold, and echoing with absolute authority. "You drained your last remaining pennies, took out predatory loans against your own cars, and wired 100% of your liquid cash to Emerald Zenith Holdings. Did you honestly think an anonymous foreign billionaire would rent a $50 million estate to a drowning, incompetent banker? Emerald Zenith Holdings is my private shell company. You are standing in my house. You just enthusiastically bankrolled your own public execution." Marcus opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, breathless wheeze came out. His entire fabricated reality was collapsing on live display. Before he could even attempt to recover, the heavy crowd parted further. The managing director of the elite investment bank, the very man who held Marcus's entire career in his hands, stepped directly into the clearing. He completely ignored Marcus's frantic, pleading eyes. Instead, The incredibly powerful executive buttoned his tailored jacket and bowed his head respectfully to me. "Good evening, Chief Executive Officer Robinson," the managing director said, his tone dripping with profound professional reverence. "On behalf of the entire board, we are incredibly honored to finally meet the visionary behind Aegis Terra Innovations in person. We had absolutely no idea this was your private residence." The name of my massive green technology empire hit the Robinson family like a physical freight train. Arthur's knees actually buckled, forcing him to grip the edge of a nearby catering table to keep from completely collapsing onto the floor. I turned my gaze slowly toward the managing director. "It is a pleasure to meet you. However, I am deeply disappointed by the representation your bank has provided tonight. I recall explicitly signing a morality and ethical conduct clause in our preliminary broker agreement this morning. The clause stated that any hostile, insulting, or unethical behavior directed at me or my associates would result in immediate consequences." The managing director's face hardened into absolute ice. He turned slowly to look at Marcus, who was now visibly shaking violently, tears of pure terror welling up in his eyes. "Marcus, you are a complete, staggering embarrassment to our institution," the managing director stated, his voice devoid of any mercy. "You just aggressively threatened and publicly insulted our most valuable billion-dollar client. You are officially fired, effective immediately. I will personally ensure your trading licenses are permanently revoked by the Federal Regulatory Authority by 9 o'clock Monday morning. You will never work in finance in this city again." Marcus collapsed to his knees, right there on the expensive rugs, weeping loudly, burying his face in his hands as his entire life shattered into absolute ruin. Seeing her husband completely destroyed, Victoria let out a piercing, hysterical sob. Eleanor stood frozen by the fireplace, her meticulously crafted high society illusion crumbling rapidly as the wealthy women around her began stepping away, looking at my mother with blatant, unrestrained disgust. But the absolute best part of the evening was Arthur, the ruthless, tyrannical real estate baron who had proudly thrown me into a sub-zero blizzard was now desperately scrambling forward. His arrogant pride had entirely evaporated, replaced by the pathetic, sniveling survival instinct of a cornered rat. He reached out with shaking, sweaty hands, desperately attempting to grab the fabric of my dress. "Scarlett, my beautiful daughter, please," Arthur begged, his voice cracking pitifully. "I did not know, I swear to you, I did not know you were the buyer. We are family. Blood is thicker than water. You bought Pinnacle Skyline Corporation to save us, right? You are going to keep me on as the honorary chairman. We can rule the city together, just like I always wanted." I looked down at him with an expression of absolute, unfeeling zero. I motioned to my assistant, who had quietly stepped out of the private elevator behind me. She handed me a thick, heavy black leather folder. I tossed it carelessly onto the floor, right at Arthur's expensive leather shoes. "I did not buy your company to save you, Arthur," I stated, my voice echoing like a judge reading a final, inescapable sentence. "I bought it to completely erase you. I signed the final acquisition documents at exactly 9 o'clock this morning. I also officially activated the historical financial misconduct provision. I possess thousands of pages of encrypted evidence proving your massive federal emissions fraud. As the new sole owner, I have unilaterally fired you and your entire executive board. There is absolutely zero severance. Your corporate pension is permanently frozen. You own nothing. Your legacy is entirely dead, and it now belongs exclusively to the daughter you threw out into the snow." Arthur let out a guttural, agonizing scream, dropping to his hands and knees, frantically clawing at the leather folder as if the printed documents inside could somehow magically change. Eleanor rushed forward, sobbing uncontrollably, begging the surrounding guests for help, but every single person simply turned their backs, refusing to make eye contact with a rapidly sinking ship. I did not feel a single drop of pity. I raised my hand slightly, signaling the imposing security team lining the walls. "Remove them," I commanded, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. And do not let them use the grand foyer. Escort this trash out through the rear freight elevator used for the garbage collection. Make sure they are thrown completely off the estate grounds. The massive guards moved in instantly, grabbing Arthur, Eleanor, Victoria, and the weeping Marcus by their expensive clothes. The Robinson family kicked, screamed, and wailed pathetically as they were aggressively dragged across the beautiful marble floors, pulling them away from the glittering chandeliers and shoving them forcefully through the hidden service doors. I stood perfectly still on the grand staircase, sipping my aged bourbon, watching them disappear into the cold, dark reality of their new impoverished existence. I finally realized that the greatest, most absolute form of revenge is never found in screaming matches or angry violence. True revenge is undeniable, staggering success in the heavy, eternal silence of your enemies losing absolutely everything. Thank you so incredibly much for staying with me and listening to my story today. I would sincerely love to know where you are listening from. So please let me know your city and country in the comments below. As I mentioned earlier, if you found today's story engaging and satisfying, please consider helping us out by joining the Maya Revenge Stories Patreon channel. You will get access to the absolute best, highly exclusive true stories with incredible emotional details that we simply cannot publish here on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen, or by using the link provided in the description or the pinned comment below. Thank you again for your amazing support, and have a wonderful day.